all of our attention is 100% on what's going to happen in recruiting. And, we have all the transfer portal information, Florida State closing in on trying to wrap up what will be an elite class. All right. And the full push was on this weekend. Jeremiah Smith, the number one receiver in the country, the number one recruit in the country, verbally committed to Ohio State, on campus this past weekend, and was here obviously because Florida State got the last visit. And that is a big deal typically if you can make it happen. There have been rumors for weeks now about what was possible. I've addressed some of that. But we know Jeremiah had a great weekend here, connecting a lot with players. Edwin Joseph, Keon Coleman. And they tried to utilize, according to Michael Langston at Warchant.com, they really tried to utilize the opportunity to have Jeremiah interacting with players, lots of players, and to try to give the player, in this case Jeremiah Smith, a sense of what a day is like for a Florida State football player, what's expected of you, the way it's structured, the interaction with your teammates, all of the things that we've talked about on this show for a very long time that has made this an attractive place for, I think, both transfer portal players, but also now, obviously, incoming recruits out of the high school ranks. It is a big deal to be able to get them a taste, a feel for what that is, because the number one reason that Florida State continues to be an elite destination right now has been the total flip of the culture. The culture flip, which is what led to, obviously, wins on the field. Now, you got to bring in talent, but you got to do it simultaneous to finding the right kinds of guys that help illuminate the culture you're creating or that you want. And it's a hard thing to do. You got to find a player. He's got to be a difference maker. Got to find a guy that's going to change the scoreboard, change the game in your favor, while also making sure that they fit in the culture that you've created. There was toxicity here 4 years ago, and they've moved away from that to the point now where we just make assumptions about where Florida State's at, right? About how guys will act, how guys will work, how guys will dedicate themselves to the plan, and they'll work that plan. And they'll dedicate themselves not only to Mike Norvell and what he's teaching them and what he's espousing, but also dedicate themselves to bettering their opportunities. And all the while, that bonds you with the guy next to you doing the exact same thing. And then voila, a culture is created. And it sounds easy, but it's not easy. It's never easy. And they've been able to do that. And so getting Jeremiah Smith in here again and letting him get a feel for that, right? Having him come in a time where there are players around to talk with him and to let him see that, right? To feel that, to talk about what that's like. I think it's huge that when you have, I remember when Mike got the job, we've talked about this a lot, and you never know what's going to be real and what are just platitudes, coaches just saying what they think they have to say. It's not until you get into these camps and you've been a part of several of them where you're, in my case, you're at these practices or you're conducting these interviews and you watch these practices and you see the way the players interact and then you see what the coaches do and if there's a consistency there, all of that stuff. You don't really know how it's going to go. But I remember way back, I'll circle back to this now, when Mike got the job, when he first addressed the press, he basically said, look, within reason, I want all of you guys there. I'm proud of what we're going to build. I'm proud of the way we go about it, and I want it documented. Because if you document it, a couple things happen. My players get their just due. You'll talk about them because they're the ones putting in the hard work. They're the ones committing. They're the ones saying yes and moving forth, taking that leap of faith. And as they succeed, and he believes they certainly will, you guys will be there to write those stories, to tell those stories on the air, and that shines a light on their successes, and I want my players to get the credit. But he's not dumb. He understands, too, that it's a PR boon, that then the coaches look good, and they, too, get illuminated along with their players. But what I've noticed is that along the way, while all of this was happening, that players from outside the program, we're beginning to hear about this, see this, and think about joining something like this. And so we just wondered, okay, this is going to work in the portal. Is it going to work with a high school class? Well, Jeremiah Smith would go a long way if you could find a way to flip that kid to come to Tallahassee in further solidifying where Florida State's at, both in the high school ranks, the portal ranks, the culture, all of it. It would just continue to add to what's been an incredible run that has been obviously well documented and well covered. So we'll see. We don't have much longer to wait. We don't have much longer to wait. Next up, people will look at LJ McCray. Of course, is a verbal UF commitment. Visiting FSU this weekend, going to visit Auburn as well. I don't think it looks good for Florida when a big-time recruit is out there visiting other places. Golly, one thing that stands out, if you guys saw that picture of him and Jared Verse, LJ McCray is a big man. I mean, Jared Verse is huge. And you're sitting there looking at that picture of LJ McCray, and you're thinking, well, sweet Jesus. I mean, he's got to be every bit 6'6", 6'7". Monster of a man. Wonder what he weighs by the time he's done playing football, just as an aside. Like, you look at that frame and you realize how much bigger that kid can get. He's going to be massive before it's all said and done. Let me give you an overall assessment of kind of both recruiting and the portal. And, Florida State's in a unique position right now. Because one of the things that we're seeing is that Florida State no longer has to jump at every opportunity they see. They no longer have to kind of sit back and say, all right, well, that's a talented plus player. We got to say yes to him. Now they actually, not only do they not have to do that, they got to be careful not to do it. Florida State, and I can tell you from talking to people behind the scenes yesterday and on Saturday, really is going to have an opportunity, not the pick of the litter, because you're still competing with the best of the best, the Alabamas and obviously the Georgias, and, you're competing with your rivals in state. You're doing all those things. You're still going to have to outduel an Auburn, for example. Auburn, who a year ago showed they were desperate, were willing to, quote unquote, spend, had some money to throw at the problem, if you will. So there's still some of that out there. But if you look at it, again, I think Florida State can kind of, all right, well, there are defensive ends that have kind of proclaimed their interest publicly, and those that have done so privately. And that's the second part that I find interesting, is we're starting to hear a lot of that, okay, you know what? I don't want to make a lot of noise on social media, but I'm kind of interested in you. Would you be interested in me if I were to enter the portal? And these are, from what I'm told, big-time players. In some cases, these are names players at a Ohio State or an Oklahoma or a Michigan or a Southern Cal or a Texas or whatever, right? You're going to sit back and you've got a lot of guys. The game is shifting. The way the game is being played now has changed. The market is forever changing. I'll tell you this, the market is plummeting for the cost of a defensive end, if you will, because there are a lot of them out there. There's a plethora of players to choose from. So guys that think they're going to get $800,000 to $1 million or $700,000, man, no. I mean, you might get one program that feels like they have to make a splash, throw a lot of money at a kid in order to secure his services. But Florida State and a lot of the other organizations associated with collectives across the country that have it buttoned up and know what they're doing are not allowing a kid to reset the market. So that market cost for those kinds of players at a certain position are plummeting in some ways. It's kind of sit back and let's see what we have. It's not do nothing. It's certainly be aggressive behind the scenes and understand the landscape. But that landscape has opened up tremendously for Florida State because of the success on the field, the reputation of the culture I just described that's been well documented, the wins, let's not forget the wins, there's a ton of them, and what they think Florida State's going to be moving forward. KJ Bolden to get an in-home visit from Mike, and then an on-campus visit, which is the last official visit for him. That'll give opportunities to guys that are already part of this class, say like Lester, to talk to him and say, hey, let's do this thing. What are we doing here? I get it. You've got that chance now to maybe make that final splash. So it's a busy but fun time because you keep hearing about this name, and they're all associated in some way, maybe not always the leader, in some way with Florida State. And Mike and his staff have to be unbelievably busy.